Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today, I have the great pleasure of Cheryl Dixon. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, good to see you and good to be chatting with you. I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit about you and then we'll get into some conversation with you. So you're a strategic communication brand marketing professional with over 25 years of experience in working in many organizations. Some of those organizations include Coty, Chanel and Pepsi. But also in addition to that, you are adjunct professor with more than 15 years of teaching the graduate level classes at Columbia University and also New York University. So you've got the experience of actually doing the stuff as well as the theory that you're teaching with your students on a day-by-day basis. So that's wonderful. And it's really great to have you on the show today. And before we get into the conversation today, I want to ask, what do you love about what you do, Cheryl?
That's a great question and a hard one because there's so much I love about what I do. It's one of my fellow colleagues at Columbia coined the term of pracademic. So I'm a practicing communications professional as well as an academic. So I get to pontificate and study theory about communication strategy, but then turn around and say, well, here's how we use it. Here's what it means. Here's why we should care. And I think that, there is a lot more focus on communication and effective communication, especially now. So I'm thrilled to see more people paying attention to it and prioritizing its importance. And at the end of the day, it's about helping other people be great and being able to share their ideas and communicate more effectively.
Oh, and what got you into that sort of passion about communication? So, because I know you've had many roles of being the chief communication officers in businesses. What got you into that sort of understanding it in the depth you know it, but also practicing it as well?
Out of sheer frustration, because I think that, communication is not taught often. It's not taught in business school, and you see very smart people and very good leaders that are poor communicators, or they're just not. We're not setting the best foundation for success, by helping these leaders or these very smart business people or creative people to be able to share their ideas. So when I saw all of the challenges that could happen in teams and organizations and just, with leadership and employees, I kind of set out, teaching to cure the world one jerk at a time, one poor communicator at a time, because I just, people, and also that just when we're not focusing on it, obviously communication is an intuitive process. We communicate all the time just by talking with people, but having the luxury of taking a step back and really thinking about how we're communicating, how we're appearing, taking ourselves out of our own thoughts and really thinking about our audience and what we're empowering when we're communicating to someone else.
And I guess in some ways, because we do all communicate all the time, I think often we all think we communicate well, don't we? Because we're thinking, well, we've been doing this since I've been 2 years old. Why should I not communicate? That's so easy. I can talk away and no problem at all. And I guess what we need to do is almost deconstruct that whole communication process, isn't it? What happens and how we get to be more effective.
Yeah, deconstruction is a great way of doing it. I'll often, whether I'm teaching class or working with a leader, I talk about a communications playbook. And the questions I often ask are, how do you think you're being perceived? How would you want to be perceived? And where do you think that sweet spot is in the middle where there's opportunities for improvement? And then also, if someone kind of looks at where do I find that I have the most challenge or the most misunderstanding, or do I have to explain myself in certain situations? So when you are communicating well, fantastic. But if you break it down and deconstruct it, you can understand why a communication is going well so that you can repeat your success. And if it's breaking down, if you get if there's misunderstanding or you walk away from a conversation or a meeting saying, well, that didn't go like I hoped or as I anticipated, or there's just complete disagreement, being able to break it down and deconstruct to see what went wrong so that you can think about how to do something differently next time. we all have our triggers. We all have people that we communicate very well with, and people that push our buttons that it doesn't flow as easily. And if you can practice and think of a different way to communicate with those that it doesn't come so naturally, then you're really creating that good playbook for yourself.
And I guess it's about reflecting, isn't it, on those and being really aware of when you do communicate, however you communicate, because we're not just talking here, because communication can just be your presence as well, isn't it? It's not just about the verbal, the written, and then the sort of talking aspects.
Oh yeah, of course. And reflecting is a good word. It's also the willingness to kind of take oneself out of our own ego, putting the onus on someone else that, well, they should understand what I meant. There's so many times I see a written communication and it wasn't received in the spirit or the way that the writer intended. And usually I can kind of look and see where something went wrong or what the original intention was. But it's to really improve your skill and to become much better at it. It's willing to take a look and reflect and see what could have been done differently.
Brilliant. And I don't know if you're referring to the same article about written communication recently that I know you posted. I don't even want to share it. I don't even share that because the reason I want you to share it, because I want to talk about hybrid working as well, because I think there's a lot of talk about hybrid work at the moment. And I think it's not just because it's a trendy thing to talk about. I think it's a really important thing to talk about.
Yeah.
But also I think the crux of getting it right, whatever right is done through good communication or effective communication. So if you share that article that was written, which I thought was a bad example of how not to do it, or a good example of how not to do it, and then it can talk a bit more about how we can be more effective in a context of hybrid working as well.
Sure. So the article that I posted yesterday was from the Washingtonian, and I don't want to pick on any one person or any one organization because there's so much Monday morning quarterbacking that happens. How a company responds to an issue or a statement that a leader made, and it's very easy the next day or the next couple of days to kind of pick apart what was said or how it was said. Especially now, there's so much scrutiny on how people are saying things. And also, are they making a statement? Are they taking a stand? What action are they taking? Are they putting enough effort behind their words? So there's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of demands for transparency, expectations of transparency. And I think that, some leaders, some companies, they're just getting used to this. We're in a very new environment where there are more sensitivities and more macro issues we need to pay attention to than ever. So, but this particular article, again, I'm not quite sure what the leader was intending. I think that she was trying to put out a good message or warning against, what might happen working from home, but on the positive side, and to take, to move forward and take a good lesson from this, I think that everyone should be really thinking about, I don't want to say return to work because we've been working, but it's a return to the office, or creating some new sense of normal, or how are we going to accommodate the new needs, the new habits, or even the new convenience that people have been feeling in being able to have some flexibility in their work.
Yeah, and I think there's some real challenges with hybrid working, which I've been talking to a lot of leaders and CEOs recently. And I think one of them is that whole inclusion aspect, where you may have some people at home because you've phased I don't know, some are coming on a Monday and a Wednesday, some are Tuesday, Thursday, whatever it may be. And then you have half your force or half your team are not in the office. How can we help ensure we're keeping that communication going with those who are perhaps not in the office for various reasons in the hybrid world, and to ensure that there is inclusion happening and that sort of, I guess, ideas are coming in and that sort of communication going out?
I've joined a big company, and I'm not going to name it, but my first day, my orientation was 10 minutes of human resources paperwork, and that was it. I didn't know where my office was. I was not set up for business cards. I didn't know, there were no organizational charts, nothing, because the company was in the midst of some sort of transition. So I don't want to say that is only a problem today in hybrid environments. That exists in many big companies and many small companies. So I think, again, it's a matter of paying attention to it and making sure that there is a set goal of making someone feel included and set up for success from day one. So, a hybrid environment, I mean, when we think about communication channels, it's the same thought, it's the same strategy. We have to be a bit more creative about how we do it. But okay, if you have someone starting, who are their immediate team members? How do you set them up and make introduction access that they need from is their computer set up? Is there email set up? So from a tactical and functional perspective, are they set up to actually start working? And do they have access to the right information and the right people? Do people know that they have joined? Again, there's been times I've seen, again, big companies, and someone joins a meeting and like, well, who is this person? Then everyone's kind of afraid to ask who the person is, and they're afraid to introduce themselves because they don't know. So it's some of the basic principles of onboarding somebody, and you just need, I think there's even more of an opportunity because you don't have to worry about who's traveling or who's in the office or not in the office. So I think Zoom, and there are certain channels that make connecting with someone a lot easier.
Oh, and what do you think in the hybrid world? I agree with you. It's almost like the communication piece should be almost the same in the sense of consistency throughout, whether you're hybrid or not. Mm-hmm. But what are the things that we should be aware of to heighten our lens, I guess, on a focus on something when we're considering a hybrid environment to ensure that communication is effective to all employees? Is there any things you would think you've had conversations with organizations where you think actually this will be really helpful? Have a bit more of a focus on this when you're trying to do that hybrid approach?
Are you asking from a kind of tactical best practice perspective?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple off the top of my head. I think that because we're losing the face-to-face interaction all the time, more clarity in our communications, making sure that we're clear on expectations, because we don't have the luxury of kind of dropping back into someone's office or walking past to clarify something. I think what I've also done with some of the companies I'm working with now is creating agreements on how people will work. So taking into account different time zones. Are people expected to answer emails after a certain time? How quickly will they respond? How will they be empowered to do something? So I think that having a frank conversation about the ways that people are going to work is going to be helpful and important, and allows us to assume a lot less. And I think, just some of the other, golden rules of communication: consistency, transparency, making sure that, and especially leadership communications, that there are standing meetings, that there's a standing or consistent push message that goes out, or even office hours, to borrow something from academia. I hold office hours at Columbia during the semester. There's one night a week where my Zoom is just open and anyone can drop in. That's a lot of
what for a period of time, sort of thing.
Yep. Just keep it open, so it's kind of like the equivalent of someone walking by, open office door, or bumping into someone, at the water cooler or the coffee machine.
You reminded me of somebody I spoke to recently who, I think during the pandemic, did that very thing, I think every day for like 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And he did it for not only internally, he did it for his customers as well. And he literally had it there, and then people just popped in, and then he would chat. And it was almost the water cooler popping into his office. Yeah. And he found it really quite effective, actually. I mean, incredible. But you do that now as well, actually.
I do. Yeah, I do it during the semester. Not when I'm not teaching. But I think that, I don't want to set unreasonable expectations. I mean, I don't think many people have the luxury of an hour just, to open up a channel and let people kind of drop in. But I think paying attention to it, or just realizing and making time for it, or making it as much of a priority as anything else in your workday. So setting aside time to make sure that you're connecting with your peers, with your teams, with industry colleagues and friends. That's something else that networking has become very interesting during the pandemic. I joined, or someone invited me to join Lunch Club. Where you get these kind of random, and it's again, it's tough to keep up with sometimes, but taking a half hour, maybe once a week, to just connect with and talk with someone, it's a lot easier than taking an hour and a half to try to have a 15-minute coffee with somebody. So I think, again, it's prioritizing it and making sure that you get off that hamster wheel of your everyday, and making it important.
And I guess it's getting, just like you did that with that office hours sort of Zoom thing, it's getting creative with, isn't it? Trying to be creative how we communicate, hybrid, remote, even in a context of the office, be creative how you get your message across. And get those sort of principles of getting clarity when you're communicating as well, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm working with a leader now who's planning the return to the office, and not everyone will be returning. And she's a relatively new leader in the organization. And we're planning road shows where, rather than everyone having to meet with the team is going to them. So really planning out how they can start to create those connections and just have FaceTime with people.
That's brilliant. That really is good. And so, in terms of, and I know this is the challenge of hybrid working as well, is keeping that culture alive. Many organizations have created a culture through working in the office, social aspects of things, and events, everything else. How can we continue that in a hybrid environment? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and what are you sort of hearing how other companies may be tackling this?
Well, again, it's being creative, and it's paying attention to it. I have seen companies that, before the pandemic, that didn't have a good culture. So we can't just blame it on people working remotely or not, being together. I've seen, that there's a company that sends out DoorDash or Grubhub, vouchers. So anytime that there's a meeting, we're still all having lunch together on the company, but instead of a catered lunch, we have our voucher. And, perhaps during lunchtime, we take a break from the meeting and we're actually virtually eating lunch with somebody else. So, there's plenty of technologies that help us collaborate. It's just a matter of making use of them and, again, prioritizing them. And I'm going to go back to my thought of agreements and, and kind of expectation. If the expectation is that it's not work all the time, and the expectation is that people time or time for connecting is important because it's valuable for the company and the culture and employee satisfaction, then you prioritize that. I think also, the celebrating wins, all of the things that worked in person can still be shared virtually, somehow. Celebrating wins, acknowledging people, helping people understand their part to the whole, the vision, the mission of a company, how the company is doing. So taking those town halls that used to be in person and now doing them virtually. But, now we can, probably do more of them, because we can be a bit more nimble with technology.
Yeah, no, and I think being nimble, being agile, I think the world's got very agile. As you say, you can join lunch clubs, you can do networking. I've been on a number of networking events in a day, a couple of them, which would have taken me 2 or 3 days normally in terms of traveling and everything else. So there's elements of efficiency going on there. Obviously, it's not the same as in person. We know that.
Right.
So there's a bit of a trade-off, but it's optimizing that as well. Just looking out on as people start to go back to the office and whatever they go back to in the context of hybrid or they may stay at home, what are your thoughts on I guess, talking to leaders right now in sort of communication perspective, they need to really think about in terms of the back to work, or not back to work, back to the office aspect of things going forward this year?
Great question. I mean, I think it's truly understanding where their team members are, not from a physical location, but from a mindset perspective. There's been also a lot of change and disruption in people's lives. So how are they feeling? What's their state of mind? How do they feel about coming back to an office? And, when you have people that choose to, if the company allows more flexibility and people choose to take advantage of that and work from home more often, to set the tone and make sure that that's not punitive, that people aren't looking at people that are working from home any differently. That, if they truly say that this is okay, that they mean it. And are not just doing it out of peer pressure because other companies are doing it. There's going back to that Washingtonian article, I think one of the lines was it's harder to get rid of somebody that well. Okay, well, let's make sure that we spend as much time connecting with someone who's right in front of us physically and spending the time with someone virtually. So I think it's from a leader's perspective to understand what works, what truly works, and to make it fair and equitable across the board, and making sure that there's that equal level of transparency. I often see a big challenge that happens in organizations and with leaders is cascading, message cascading. I call it, beware of the bubble, where you have the senior leader that might be communicating to his or her direct reports. And then the expectation is that those directs will continue on down the line. And that does not always happen. And, in fact, it rarely happens without some good, clear direction and that expectation, that being set.
And what is the best practice for that then? Because we have an assumption when you communicate to somebody, they will pass it on. It might get diluted, I guess. It might get changed, which is the whole Chinese whispers, I guess, depending on the message. What is the best practice for that then, if you're communicating something quite significant from a perspective, from a board level?
Well, number one, being clear that they need to communicate it, and that there's an expectation, and making sure that there's that call to action. It's simple, and I'm laughing at having to say it, but are you being clear? Cascade this to your immediate teams and ask them to cascade it to them, or looking at the organization and seeing, is it very layered? Or does it make more sense to have the senior leader just communicate out to everybody? What is helpful, especially if there is a company-wide communication that might have different meanings to different teams, or different takeaways from different teams, that you can give specific talking points. You can't expect someone to reiterate verbatim a message, because that's not human. That's not the way we talk. It's not going to be taken the same way. Whereas if you just give, here are the main points that you need to get across, and put it in your own words, or maybe here are some of the words we want to avoid. Make sure we say this particular phrase this way if there's a legal aspect to it. But empower the leaders to be able to interpret it for their teams, because they know their teams best, and to present it, and to also add in, what it means for their team. So again, you're hitting a couple of important points right there. It's you're empowering each leader, you're creating that trust and credibility, you're increasing transparency, and you're also showing support for the organization's key messages. So it's not saying, I have to read this to you, or I was told I have to cascade this, but it's empowering someone else to get excited about it and say, here's what's being done. Here's what this means to us. Now, what do you think? So that way you open up the channels for two-way communication as well. So then, not just cascading the information down, but a good plan or a good structure will also allow for the flow to come back up. If someone is getting questions, if someone is getting feedback, that is where that's golden, to be able to get that feedback. So if I'm working on a communications plan or strategy, I'll always ask, who are the naysayers, or who was confused confused or who had questions and what were the questions about. And sometimes we don't pay attention to that. They're like, well, they don't get it, or they're not on board, or, they're always the troublemaker. Well, there's a reason. And do we know why? Is the message not clear? Are they not in the know? Do they disagree? And, are you giving your people room to disagree in a respectful and productive manner?
I want to say that amazing insight. You say it's like it's not rocket science, but in some ways it is, to be, because you live and breathe it. But what you just said there was really great, I thought. And if anybody wants to listen to that last 3 minutes, it's quite powerful stuff of how you cascade the messages. So that's really important, and it is important, and it's really great what you said there. But people are not doing it, and that's why I think we need to have these conversations about having that clear communication. I think you made some great points about empowering the leaders down as well, and that's really important, rather than become almost an order type of thing. They're embracing it in their own way and making clarity of what the key points are. And then the important thing about, I love that, the flow back up, and that's where the insights come, don't they? Where what's happening in the organization, how are people feeling of this response to this change or whatever it may be. That's really good. It's been great talking to you, Cheryl. Really loved and enjoyed this. How can people get hold of you and connect with you if they wanted to?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, so Cheryl Dixon, and I'm also I have a website. It needs to be updated a little bit, but you could still get me there, and that's Cheryl F. like Frank Dixon.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. So great to talk with you.
Thanks a lot.